fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Oh, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Joe Goldberg in the house.
I'm in the house.
Hey, Joe. Hey,
Yes.
Joe. So here we
Yeah.
go. We have got the one and only, a man who sold 275 million plus books in the world. Almost as much as you.
Yeah. I think he's got me like 275 million.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Jeffrey Archer, thank you for coming on the show.
Delighted. Always glad to be. Good to see you again, Joe.
Good to see you, sir.
Well, Jeffrey, so what's going on? You've got book 7 now of the William Warwick novels, An Eye for an Eye. Tell us the premise. What's going on now?
Well, he's now reached, William Warwick has now reached chief superintendent, and he's got involved in a case where they've discovered that Thomas Jefferson, when he was in Paris, wrote a copy of the Declaration of Independence, and a written copy. Now, a printed copy went quite recently in Philadelphia for 7.7 million. So one can imagine what a handwritten copy by the great man. Sotheby's tell me around 100 million. But our great criminal, Miles Faulkner, tracks it down. Of course he does. Stop grinning, Joe.
I can't help
Of course he
it.
does.
The way you
Of course he
describe
does.
him.
And
Yeah.
we have to get it back for the American people.
How do you come up with your ideas for this? I know it's a generic question, but how did you come onto this idea for this story?
Well, this particular one, I actually met a man called Willie Hartley, whose great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, a member of Parliament at the time of George III and Jefferson, was a personal friend of Jefferson. And what was unusual about Mr. Hartley, he actually approved of the Americans wanting independence. He actually approved of what they were trying to achieve. Didn't make him popular with his friends in the House of Commons, but of course it meant he was in contact with Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin. And I found this man whose family have been living in the same house for, hold your breath, Americans, 500 years in the same house. And he had several letters from Jefferson and from Adams and from Franklin. And one of them suggested that out there was a handwritten copy of the Declaration, which, of course, if it existed, if you could find it, would be worth 100 million. And, of course, my master criminal, Miles Faulkner.
Wow. Who else?
Yeah, exactly. I since I'm a John Adams fan, he was my historical hero growing up. I was my history degrees. My mind is John Adams. How much was the history of America and the British history play into the current crime of the book?
Well, of course, you have parts where you go back and see what's happening with Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson in Paris when one was the ambassador and one took over from the other. And you see what they are working with the French against the British. And so there's that entanglement intertwined with a modern story of finding the actual printed copy. Because the printed copy, Joe, had 2 extra clauses that I'm sure you know. And one of those clauses was that the relationship with the King of England, the other was on slavery. And expert academics, this is where the research comes in, expert academics have suggested that if Congress had accepted the 2 extra clauses, there would have been no civil war and slavery would have ended considerably earlier. So that fascinated me as well, and intertwining it right up to date was the fun.
So you had connections between the current situations between people in nation states and the historical situation between people and nation states, the idea of slavery, the idea of international relations from the historical perspective, because the debate of the Declaration of Independence and slavery was a huge, obviously, and why they didn't do it. And today, right? So your master criminal and your master detective were up against those sort of themes too, as they're hunting it down, I'm assuming. Am I coming through? I mean, there's big themes here. Let me ask a question then, as I'm going. Are there bigger themes inside the crime story?
Oh, good point. Good point.
That's what I'm trying to say in my rambling historical way.
The Prime Minister calls for the main character in the book, the Hartley character, who is the great-great-great-great-great-grandson, and asks him to go out to Saudi Arabia to close a deal. And while he's out in Saudi Arabia, he's arrested for a murder he didn't commit, thrown in jail. And unless the British can get him out of jail, they cannot solve the problem. That's when William and Ross move in, and a part of the story is how they do or do not get him out of jail while he's in a Saudi Arabian prison. And in answer to your question, where do the ideas come from? One of the privileges I've had over the years of having been a British Member of Parliament, now a member of the House of Lords, and the amazing contacts I've made over the years, is if you sit and listen to these people long enough, they come up with stories. I'll tell you one you won't believe, Joe. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready. I'm sitting.
Mary and I were on a ship from Venice to Athens. I was giving a lecture. The lecture was entitled 13 Years with Margaret Thatcher, 7 Years with John Major, Princess Diana's Auctioneer, and Can Trump Win the Election? The room was packed. So I said, when they asked me, someone said, who would you vote for, Geoffrey, if you were an American citizen? And I said, I would vote for Nikki Haley against Donald Trump. And if Nikki Haley had beaten Donald Trump, I would have voted for Nikki Haley against Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden had stood aside, I would have voted for Nikki Haley against Kamala Harris. And someone was tapping away on the phone, Joe. And they came up afterwards and said, I've sent your message to Nikki Haley. And I said, oh, really? Do you know her? Yes, she's my daughter-in-law. So I had dinner that night with Mr. and Mrs. Haley. As I was leaving the room, there was a tap on the shoulder, and the man said, how nice to see you again, Geoffrey. And I said, how nice to see you again, Newt Gingrich. And we had dinner. Now, if you put that in a book, no one would believe it. It's a coincidence beyond belief. But Mary and I had dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Haley, and we had dinner with Newt Gingrich. So I listened to their opinions of how the election would go, what was happening in the United States, because as you know, Joe, I have a fascination with your country, and it gets into all my books. But it's an Englishman's view, and could be wrong.
Yes, you have that perspective from not here, which is a good perspective to have. Well, we were, from the point of view of telling stories, my little gang of people were saying, boy, if you put down exploding pagers and exploding walkie-talkies into a fiction book, no one would believe you. That'd be beyond belief, right? And so it's there in modern life. It's been taken by the Israelis already. So the stories are lying there for you, but how do you take that idea? You read the letters, you met the grandson or grandparent was. How does that become a story in your mind? How do you piece that thing together?
Yes, good point. Well, you start off with the idea. I started off with the idea of our hero being arrested, of seeing the Prime Minister, going to Saudi Arabia, being arrested for a crime he hadn't committed. He'd witnessed it, but he hadn't committed it. The person who'd committed it was a Saudi Arabian. The Saudi Arabian got him thrown in jail. We now have to get him out because the French and the British are fighting for an arms contract with Saudi Arabia, one worth several billion. And this part is true, because when I had the privilege of working for Margaret Thatcher, I was very aware she was closing a deal in Saudi Arabia, an arms deal for several billion. And I even knew the man she'd chosen, Warwick, to close the deal. So I had that already, Joe, and set that up. Of course, Warwick never witnessed the murder, and he was never thrown in jail. So there's where my imagination comes in. But you've got the Prime Minister of Britain desperate to get this person out of jail, and you've got the man in jail, and you've got William there in the middle, and it's in Miles Faulkner's interest to keep him in jail, because he's stolen the Declaration of Independence from the man's mother, paid her a ridiculously small sum, but a son can't do anything while he's in jail.
I got another book to read. I think I needed more books to read. Last time we talked, and I don't want to jump around too much, but I'm in this process right now, so as people know, I only ask questions that help me. You mentioned you write a lot of drafts, right? You rewrite 17 and things like that. Can you tell me a little bit about when you know you're done?
Yeah.
Why you do that? Because I am
Good
in that.
question.
Right? I'm up to my neck in this right now. So I remember you talked about that, and I wanted to make sure I asked this question.
That's a very good question. The first draft is really just getting the story down and takes about 300 hours, about 50 days. I then take a break and I go back and I have that double space typed up for me, and I go back with a pencil because, as you know, I handwrite every word on a very, very vicious timetable. So I go back with the pencil and the double, and the answer to your question is the draft you have in front of you of an eye for an eye is the 14th draft. My publisher, my editor will see it at about the 8th draft, and no one will then see it again until the 14th draft, when it's seen again by the publisher, but not by the editor. So the answer to your question is it's a long and tough process. And when young people come to me, Joe, and say, I want to be a best-selling author, I say, and because we both know, you and I both know, if the God-given talent is the bit of luck, the rest is bloody hard work.
It's hard.
So I say, go to the ballet. And they say, what do you mean, Jeffrey, go to the ballet? And I say, look at the prima ballerina on the stage. Imagine how many hours she spent getting to be the prima ballerina. And then look at all the young girls behind and imagine how many years they took to just be on the stage with, and the work to be on the stage with the prima ballerina. Do you think it's any different wanting to be number one on the New York Times bestsellers list? It isn't.
Well, then how do you know, as you're going through drafts, that this was the right move?
That's
next step.
Yeah, interesting. Yes. I think when it reaches a stage when you're only adding a sentence every 3 or 4 pages, 2 or 3 words, I think you say, wait, I'm there. You might change great for good. You might change horrendous for terrible. But it's down to that. And that doesn't come until it runs so smoothly, Joe, that you pick up the one word that's wrong. You don't pick it up when you're putting the story down on paper. You pick it up when it's nearly there.
So I don't usually ask process questions. I usually ask how to get to know the author questions. But from your first draft, the 50-day draft, to 8th, when if someone else saw it for the first time, how much was it different? 100% different? 70% different? I mean, because this is how much of your favorite things, the Leonard Elmore, kill your favorite stuff, until you get to the end, till you get the really stuff that keeps the pages turning. Does it change a lot from your original draft to the 8th draft to the 14th draft?
I would think it gets a little bit longer. I would think a first draft would be about 80,000 words. I think it grows a bit, Joe. I think it
really
grows a bit, where you've left stuff out. You've done the story, and you haven't filled in the detail. But you cut it as well, because you see a scene which is boring or wrong and doesn't make you want to turn the page. It doesn't move the story on. So it's a long process. I mean, I had a distinguished journalist visit me recently and asked me why his book wasn't a bestseller. And I said, how many drafts did you do? And he said, 1. I'm a journalist. I do it in 1. I said, well, you're no longer a journalist if you're joining my game. 14 drafts is what I do. And if I set number 1 in, it wouldn't be a bestseller.
Well, can you tell me, here's 30 minutes before we came on air, this is exactly what I was thinking about. I got 3 chapters in the middle of my book. I'm close to being done. I love them, but I know I got to cut them.
You know what, Joe?
Yeah, I'm listening. You see my pencil. I'm taking notes.
Go on.
Yeah, so I mean, I have these 3 chapters that I just know that when I get done in 8th draft or next draft, I like them a lot. I like how I wrote them, but I know that they don't turn the page fast enough. They're too wordy. But what, when in your dozens of books that you've written, is the mental strength you have to say, I'm going to kill this gem that I know I wrote?
Yeah.
Because I am struggling 30 minutes ago on this.
Joe, not easy. I sit up in the middle of the night and think that question through, so that when I sit down at the script the following day, I've said, Ross has got to be killed, Harry's got to be promoted, the girl's got to disappear with another man. Then I write that and it doesn't work, so the girl doesn't disappear with another man. Ross is still it's a long process. Now I can see you putting your hands up in anguish.
Yeah, I know.
I wish there was if you think I'm going to tell you about a shortcut, you're wrong.
Oh, man. End of interview. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a nice day. Yeah. Here's a lovely parting gift. Please exit on the left. Well, let me get out of process and ask you questions about me. You have a character. You've written the dozens of books. You've got the series of books. And I know you get asked this question, but people want to know who are listening. How has your character changed through time? And did you know where they were going to be in this book when you wrote the previous book, or did they just develop as you were writing the book, current book?
When I started book 1 of this series, the William Warwick series, Nothing Ventured, I had no idea what book 2 would be. I'd already decided, Joe, that each book would be a different subject, and each book he would move up in rank. So he went from constable to sergeant to inspector to chief inspector to superintendent to chief superintendent, and I'm now on chief superintendent. And the last book, which I haven't written, I will have to decide whether he becomes commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. So that was the arc. And then the second arc was a different subject. So book 1 was art and antiques. Book 2 was drugs. Book 3 was murder. And my man was moving through Scotland Yard, learning these different things. So yes, it was always a different rank and always a different story. But the answer to your question is, I ain't got a bloody clue. Now, what I did was I employed a chief superintendent who'd been head of the murder squad and a lady called Michelle Roycroft, who'd been a sergeant in the arts and antique squad. And when I changed subject, they were always able to say, I know the head of the drug squad. I know the head of the murder squad. I know the head of immigration. And they would bring them in. For example, tomorrow I am seeing the head of security for the 2012 Olympic Games, because that's the next book when William Warwick's in charge of the Olympics. So I am seeing Commander Bob Broadbank tomorrow at 1:00. I've already read the notes he's made, but I now need 2 or 3 hours with him to draw it out of him, Joe.
Well, and there's another whole question about getting first source information and interviewing people and getting out, not just doing it on Google searching. But let me go to this question, how you answered it, because when you read your books, I'm saying they're identifying their career. They're identifying themselves by their career. They're moving up in rank. They're achieving things, but their internal selves, how they see themselves, how they have goals and ambitions beyond just what's on their shoulders and what their title is. How do you lay that into the development of the subject, murder, and their advancement in career? The inside their heads. Is that important to you as much? Because you have it in there. You have it in there.
I'm going to tell you, Joe, something that's just the total truth, and that you're not going to like it. Are you ready? Are you ready, Joe?
I'm
clutching. If I could tell you how I did it, Joe, I would. I haven't got a clue. I get up in the morning, I pick up the pen moves across the paper, and I am just a very lucky man. The ideas come again and again, they never stop flowing, and people say, serious people in publishing houses say, it's a gift. And I was once edited, it was a very great privilege, with Cain and Abel, my most successful book. Now,
the book,
now been read by 100 million people on its 132nd reprint. I had the honor of being edited by Corley Smith, who'd edited J.D. Salinger. And Joe, I put that question to him a different way. I said to the great man, when I'd finished Cain and Abel, what is the difference between a great author and a great editor? And he said, the first draft.
First draft for you. Everything else is editing. Because I'm asked, that's a great answer that you sort of don't know, because a lot of us are, I need to know what the arc is and their mental, and I'm going to develop a character from here, and every chapter shows how they change and how they develop, and you get caught up in that, and you don't create the page turner, right? You've created the psychological, and you create the nice outline. As you say, you got to create the page turner. So that's actually great advice. It's just right? Just sit down and write.
And I believe the writer doesn't know the answer to that question, Joe, even when they've finished the book. I think the public decide that. You hand the book in, you hope and pray, you haven't got a bloody clue, but the public tell you.
Exactly. So you don't really, this goes back to my draft question, you don't really know when you're really done.
No.
It's the reader who knows when you're really done. When you're writing, and you've written dozens of books, once again, and dozens of successful books in the world, do you think about the reader as you're writing? Are they over your shoulders? Is they're the ones who know whether it's a good book or not?
There's a natural fear there, Joe, which you would understand, that if your book has gone to number 1 on the New York Times bestsellers list and it's sold millions of copies, you wonder, 1, can I do it again? 2, when you sit down, is this good enough? 3, when you hand it in, because I've seen so many authors who've been one-book wonders or even two-book wonders and then have disappeared. In the 40 years I've been doing it, I could tell you 100 authors who've got to number 1 and you can't even name them nowadays. Yeah. And I've had 45 years since Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, through to An Eye for an Eye. And it goes on and on. So the answer to your question is no, I don't know. And each time, don't kid yourself. When I handed the last book in, when I handed An Eye for an Eye in, I didn't know. And then I got a note from a man called Jeff Duffield, who for years had been head of Pan Mac in England, Pan Mac Publishing in England. The simple line, An Eye for an Eye is the best Warwick book so far. I finished it at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's when you know, Joe.
Yes.
That's when you realize
Ding.
When someone says it's wonderful, that's rubbish. When someone says I loved it, that's rubbish. When they say I finished it at 1 in the morning, you know you've done it.
They couldn't put it down. Exactly. Let me ask one more question, just a total change of topic, maybe going in the wrong direction. You've been around forever writing great books. You knew Nelson DeMille? He just died. I was just wondering if you knew him.
Oh, no, personally, no.
Okay. I just
aware of him, but didn't know.
Yeah, we're all aware.
Oh, a great storyteller.
Yes. It reminds me somewhat from the storytelling of some of the things that you pulled together, too. So that's why I was wondering.
That's very
being a peer writer. So anyway, Al, I'm done. I just wanted to say shout out to Nelson DeMille, who just died. Another great thriller writer, storyteller.
Well, there you have it. Another great interview.
Joe, thank you very much, as always. Now, Joe.
Yes.
Listen carefully.
I'm holding my pen up for those who can't see.
You've got to believe you can do it.
Exactly.
You've got to get out of bed in the morning and believe you can do it. And pray the gods are on your side. Watch me, Joe. After I finish each session, I go like this. Thank you very much.
You're looking up.
I've been very privileged and very lucky, Joe, and I'm very aware of it.
Well, the readers are lucky, too. When
That's kind.
You get a chance to read books over decades.
That's very kind.
I mean, 4 decades? Was it the 80s, late 70s? When was your first book?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a gift. That's a gift.
And whenever, not pros like you, but whenever the fans stop you in the street and ask you, how do you do it? I don't know, Joe. I wish I could. I'd write a book if I could, saying how to write a bestseller, but you've got to have that bit of luck, which is some Irish leprechaun on your shoulder saying, right. I've got a good story for you, Jeffrey.
Well, your writing book is to read your books. Great writers read. So read the books and you'll learn a lot.
Quite right.
Go ahead. I'm all done. Sitting back and putting down the pen, Al.
Well, there you have it.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. Thank you very much.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.